Hey, welcome back to Edgar Cayce Narratives. If you've been here before, you already know this channel looks at patterns in human experience, not just ideas or theories. And today we're starting with something many people feel, but rarely explain clearly. There are people who live normal lives on the surface. They study, they work, they build relationships, and nothing about them seems unusual at first glance. But if you listen closely, many of them carry a quiet and persistent thought that doesn't fully go away. And that thought is simple. I feel like I don't belong to this time. This feeling is not about being alone, and it is not about being rejected by others. Because even when life is stable and things are going well, something still feels slightly off, like the systems around them were built in a way that doesn't match how they naturally think or process the world. They are present in reality, they understand what is expected, and they can function like everyone else. But internally, there is a constant sense that something does not fully align, and that misalignment does not disappear with effort or time. So the question is not just why they feel different, but what exactly feels wrong to them, and whether this is just an individual trait or a repeating pattern that shows up across many people in a very similar way. Before going further, we need to be clear about one thing, because the moment Atlantis is mentioned, most people immediately think of a lost city, advanced technology, or a story that sounds more like speculation than something grounded in real experience. And that is not what this video is about. This is not a video about proving whether Atlantis existed, and it is not an attempt to describe a civilization in detail, because focusing on the place itself often distracts from something more important, which is the type of people Edgar Cayce associated with it and the patterns that appear in their lives. On this channel, we don't start from belief and we don't ask you to accept an idea before looking at it. Instead, we begin with something observable, which is how people feel, how they think, and the kinds of patterns that repeat across different individuals who have never met each other but describe similar internal experiences. So instead of asking, was Atlantis real? The better question for this conversation is much simpler and more practical, which is, why do some people consistently feel out of place in the modern world, even when they are fully capable of living in it? This shift matters because once you move away from the idea of a lost place and focus on the people themselves, the topic becomes less about history and more about patterns that can still be observed today. Patterns that show up in behavior, thinking, and emotional responses in ways that are surprisingly consistent. What we are looking at is not a myth, but a recurring experience. And the goal is not to prove where it comes from, but to understand why it feels so familiar to the people who have it. Imagine someone who, from the outside, looks completely normal. They go through school without major issues. They learn quickly, they adapt when needed, and they can function in most environments without drawing attention. But internally, their experience of the world has always felt slightly different in a way they cannot fully explain. From an early age, they notice things that others don't question. They look at systems, structures, and rules, and instead of accepting them as given, they feel an immediate sense that something is inefficient, incomplete, or built in a way that doesn't make full sense. And this reaction is not emotional or rebellious. It is more like a quiet observation that keeps repeating over time. As they grow older, this pattern becomes clearer, because while other people learn how to navigate the world by adjusting themselves to it, this person keeps feeling like they are adjusting to something that was never designed with their way of thinking in mind. And even when they succeed by normal standards, there is still a background sense that they are working within a system that feels limited or slightly misaligned. They might say things like, "I understand how things work, but I don't understand why they are built this way." Or, "There are better ways to do this, but no one seems to question the current structure." And these thoughts are not driven by ego or the need to be different. They come from a consistent internal perspective that sees patterns and possibilities that don't match what is commonly accepted. At the same time, they are not disconnected from reality. They can hold conversations, build careers, and maintain relationships, and nothing about their external life suggests that they don't belong, which is exactly what makes the experience harder to explain, because the mismatch is not visible. It exists entirely on the inside. This creates a quiet contradiction, because they are fully present in the world. But the way the world operates never feels completely natural to them. And this feeling does not come and go. It stays consistent across different environments, different stages of life, and different situations, even when everything around them changes. Over time, they stop trying to explain it to others, not because the feeling disappears, but because it is difficult to put into words without sounding abstract or disconnected. So it becomes something they carry privately, a constant awareness that they are part of this world, but not fully aligned with how it functions at a deeper level. What makes this experience more than just an individual story is the fact that it shows up in many people who have never met each other, who come from different backgrounds, and who live in completely different environments. Yet when they describe how they relate to the world, the structure of their experience is often almost identical. One of the most consistent patterns is a strong attraction to complex systems and ideas, not in a casual way, but in a focused and almost instinctive way, where they are drawn to understand how things work at a deeper level, whether it is technology, abstract models, large-scale systems, or concepts that require layered thinking. And this interest often appears early, without being taught in a structured way. At the same time, they tend to feel uncomfortable with systems that are overly rigid or simplified, especially when those systems are widely accepted without question. And this discomfort is not about rejecting authority or resisting structure. It comes from a clear internal sense that something is missing, something is not fully optimized, or something does not align with a more complete way of understanding how things could function. Another repeating trait is the gap between capability and integration, because many of these individuals are capable of understanding complex ideas, solving problems, or seeing connections that others might overlook. But despite that, they often struggle to feel fully integrated into the environments they are part of, as if their ability does not translate smoothly into a sense of belonging or ease within existing systems. They also tend to question not just what is happening, but why it is happening in a particular way. And this questioning is not surface-level curiosity. It is a consistent pattern of looking beyond the immediate explanation and sensing that there are deeper layers that are not being addressed or even recognized in everyday thinking. Importantly, none of these traits are extreme on their own, and each one can be found in many different people. But what stands out is the combination of these traits appearing together in a very similar structure, creating a pattern that repeats across individuals who have no direct connection to each other. This is the point where the question becomes more focused, because when a pattern repeats with this level of consistency, it is no longer enough to describe it as personality or preference, and instead, it becomes necessary to ask what kind of underlying structure could be producing the same internal experience across different people in such a recognizable way. At this point, the pattern becomes harder to ignore because the same people who show strong capability and clear thinking are often the ones who feel the least aligned with the systems they are part of. And this creates a contradiction that is not easy to resolve through normal explanations. They are not outsiders in any visible sense. They can succeed in school, perform well at work, and understand what is expected of them. But even when they meet those expectations, the experience does not translate into a feeling of belonging, and instead, there is a quiet awareness that they are operating within structures that do not fully match how they think. This is where the tension becomes more specific. because it is not a conflict between the person and the world in an obvious way. It is a conflict between capability and integration, where the individual can function effectively, but cannot fully synchronize with the deeper logic of the systems around them. In many cases, this leads to a kind of internal split, where one part of them knows how to navigate reality and meet external demands, while another part continues to question the foundations of those demands, and the two do not fully merge into a single, stable experience. They may follow a path that appears stable from the outside, but internally, there is a continuous evaluation happening, where they are comparing what exists with what they sense could exist. And that comparison does not stop, even when it creates friction in their own decision-making or direction in life. Over time, this can create a pattern where they move between engagement and detachment, because they can commit to systems for a period of time, but eventually, the sense of misalignment returns. And when it does, it is not triggered by failure or conflict. It comes from the same internal recognition that something does not fully fit. What makes this tension difficult is that it cannot be solved by changing environments alone, because even when they shift careers, locations, or social circles, the underlying feeling tends to follow them, suggesting that the issue is not tied to a specific situation, but to a deeper pattern in how they relate to structured reality itself. This is the point where a standard explanation starts to feel incomplete, because the pattern is too consistent, the traits are too specific, and the internal contradiction between ability and alignment continues to repeat in ways that are difficult to reduce to personality or circumstance alone. Up to this point, everything we have described can be observed without needing any external explanation, because the pattern stands on its own. But this is where Edgar Cayce introduced a different way of interpreting what these experiences might represent, not as isolated traits, but as part of a longer continuity that extends beyond a single lifetime. In a number of his readings, Cayce suggested that some individuals who feel this kind of internal misalignment may have had past lives in what he described as Atlantis, not as a myth or a story meant to be believed without question, but as a framework to explain why certain patterns appear with such consistency across people who have no shared background. According to these readings, Atlantis was described as a civilization that had access to advanced knowledge and highly developed systems, but at the same time, it struggled with an imbalance between power and responsibility, where the ability to create and control systems grew faster than the ability to use them in a balanced and sustainable way. This detail matters because the interpretation is not focused on the level of advancement itself, but on the pattern of imbalance that developed alongside it. And this is where Cayce's perspective shifts from describing a place to describing a pattern that could continue beyond that context. In this view, the people who feel out of place today are not carrying memories of technology or specific events, but they may be carrying the psychological and behavioral patterns that were formed in an environment where complexity, control, and system building played a central role. This is why the focus is not on whether someone can recall a past life or describe Atlantis in detail, because the continuation is not about information, it is about pattern, and the pattern shows up in how they think, how they relate to systems, and how they experience alignment or misalignment within structured environments. Cayce's interpretation suggests that what is being carried forward is not knowledge in a direct sense, but a way of engaging with complexity, a tendency to move toward systems that require control and structure, and at the same time, a lingering tension that comes from having experienced imbalance within those systems. This creates a very specific kind of internal experience, where the individual is drawn to complexity and capable of understanding it, but also carries an unresolved relationship with how that complexity should be managed, integrated, or balanced in a way that feels complete. From this perspective, the feeling of not belonging is not about being in the wrong place, but about carrying a pattern that does not fully align with the way current systems are structured, because the pattern itself was formed under different conditions with different assumptions about how systems should function. What is important here is not whether this interpretation is accepted as literal, but whether it provides a useful way to understand why the same combination of traits and internal contradictions appears across different people in such a consistent way, especially when those patterns are difficult to explain through environment or upbringing alone. In that sense, Cayce's idea does not ask you to believe in Atlantis as a place. It offers a way to look at these individuals as carriers of a pattern that began in a different context and is now being expressed in a world that does not fully match the structure in which that pattern was originally formed. When you move beyond a single example and begin looking at multiple individuals who describe this same internal structure, the similarities become more defined, not in surface details, but in how their abilities, behaviors, and internal conflicts are organized in relation to each other. One of the most consistent patterns is intelligence that does not fully translate into integration, where the individual can understand complex systems, see connections quickly, and process information at a deeper level than average. But despite that, they often struggle to apply this understanding in a way that creates a stable sense of alignment within their own life, as if the capacity exists, but the connection to the environment remains incomplete. Alongside this, there is often a strong sense of capability that comes with internal conflict, because they know they can do more. They can build, organize, or improve systems, but at the same time, they hesitate, overanalyze, or feel resistance when it comes to fully committing to those systems. And this is not due to lack of confidence, but due to a deeper uncertainty about whether the systems themselves are worth committing to in their current form. Another repeating trait is a natural attraction to complexity over simplicity, where they are not satisfied with surface-level solutions or straightforward structures, and instead, they are drawn toward layered systems, interconnected ideas, and environments that require a higher level of thinking. Even when this preference makes their lives more difficult or less efficient in practical terms. At the same time, there is often difficulty functioning within rigid or predefined systems, especially when those systems do not allow for adaptation, questioning, or restructuring. And this difficulty is not expressed as open rejection, but as a gradual disengagement, where the individual participates on the surface but internally remains detached from the system's underlying logic. Across different cases, this combination creates a recognizable pattern, where the person is capable but conflicted, intelligent but not fully integrated, and consistently drawn to complexity while struggling to find a place within simplified or fixed structures. And this pattern tends to remain stable over time rather than changing with experience. What makes this more significant is that these traits do not appear randomly. They tend to cluster together in the same individuals, forming a structure that repeats across different people. And this repetition suggests that we are not looking at isolated characteristics, but at a pattern that has its own internal consistency. From Cayce's perspective, this cluster of traits reflects not just ability, but a continuation of how the individual previously related to systems. Where complexity was familiar, capability was developed, but balance and integration were not fully resolved, and that unresolved element continues to shape how they experience the present. Even without accepting that interpretation, the pattern itself remains observable, because when the same structure appears across individuals who have no shared history, no common environment, and no direct influence on each other, it becomes harder to explain it as coincidence or simple variation in personality. At that point, the focus shifts from describing individual traits to recognizing the pattern as a whole, because it is the combination of intelligence, capability, attraction to complexity, and difficulty with integration that defines the experience, not any single element on its own. When you look more closely at how this pattern operates over time, it becomes clear that it is not just a set of traits, but a recurring internal loop that influences how the individual makes decisions, interprets situations, and relates to the structures around them, often in ways that repeat across different stages of life without fully resolving. One of the central dynamics in this loop is the attraction to complexity. Because the individual does not just prefer complex systems, they feel more natural within them, as if layered structures, interconnected ideas, and multi-level thinking match the way their mind processes information, while simplified systems often feel incomplete or artificially limited. This creates a situation where they are constantly seeking environments that offer depth and challenge. But at the same time, those environments can increase the sense of misalignment, because even when the system is complex, it may still operate on assumptions or constraints that do not fully match their internal expectations of how things should function. As a result, understanding more does not always lead to feeling more integrated, and in many cases, the opposite happens, where increased awareness leads to a stronger recognition of inconsistencies, limitations, or inefficiencies within the systems they engage with. And this recognition reinforces the sense that something is not fully aligned. This is where the loop begins to stabilize, because the more they understand, the more they see what does not fit, and the more they see what does not fit, the harder it becomes to fully commit to or identify with the structures around them, even when those structures are functional in practical terms. Over time, this pattern can influence major life decisions, including career paths, areas of study, and long-term direction, because the individual may move toward fields that allow for complexity and depth, but then step back when the structure of those fields feels too rigid, too simplified, or too disconnected from how they believe systems should evolve. This can create a cycle where progress is made, followed by disengagement, followed by a search for a new system that seems more aligned, only for the same pattern to repeat again under slightly different conditions, reinforcing the sense that the issue is not tied to a specific environment, but to a deeper structure in how they relate to systems themselves. At the same time, this pattern does not prevent them from functioning or succeeding, which makes it more difficult to identify clearly, because from the outside, their life may appear stable, productive, and even successful, while internally, the loop continues to operate in the background without a clear point of resolution. What becomes important here is recognizing that this is not a random sequence of reactions, but a consistent internal structure that repeats across time, shaping how the individual experiences alignment, engagement, and meaning in relation to the systems they are part of. Even if we set aside Edgar Cayce's interpretation for a moment, the pattern we have described still exists in a way that can be observed through modern psychology, because the experience of misalignment, sensitivity to systems, and recurring internal contradiction can all be examined without needing to assume a past life origin. From a psychological perspective, one way to understand this pattern is through cognitive structure, where some individuals naturally process information in more complex and interconnected ways, leading them to notice inconsistencies, inefficiencies, or gaps in systems that others accept without question. And this heightened awareness can create both strength and friction at the same time. This kind of cognitive style often comes with a strong need for coherence, meaning the individual is not satisfied with partial explanations or simplified models, and when the systems around them fail to meet that level of internal consistency, it can create a persistent sense that something is incomplete, even if the system functions well enough for practical purposes. Another relevant factor is sensitivity to structure, where the person is not just reacting to outcomes, but to the way those outcomes are produced, and this makes them more aware of underlying frameworks, assumptions, and limitations that are not immediately visible, which can deepen their understanding but also increase their sense of distance from the system itself. There is also a connection to identity alignment, because when someone's internal way of thinking does not match the external structures they operate within, it can create a form of ongoing tension, where they are able to perform roles and meet expectations, but do not feel fully aligned with the identity those roles require them to adopt. Over time, this can lead to a pattern where the individual functions effectively on the surface, while internally maintaining a degree of separation from what they are doing, not because they lack interest or ability, but because the structure of the environment does not fully match the structure of their thinking. Importantly, none of these explanations reduce the experience to something simple or dismiss it as a flaw, because the same traits that create misalignment also enable deeper understanding, pattern recognition, and the ability to work with complexity in ways that are valuable in many contexts. What this perspective shows is that even without introducing Cayce's framework, the pattern still holds together as a coherent structure, which means the question is not whether the experience is real, but how we choose to interpret its origin and meaning. In that sense, psychology explains how the pattern operates, while Cayce's interpretation attempts to explain why it appears in such a specific and repeated form. And the two approaches do not cancel each other out, but instead offer different ways of looking at the same underlying experience. At this point, it becomes clear that the most important question is not where this pattern comes from, but what it is trying to resolve. Because whether you look at it through Cayce's interpretation or through a psychological lens, the structure of the experience points to something unfinished rather than something random. If you follow Cayce's perspective, the idea is not that these individuals are carrying memories of Atlantis in a direct or detailed way, but that they are carrying forward a pattern that was not fully integrated, a way of thinking and engaging with systems that developed under conditions where complexity increased faster than balance, and that imbalance continues to shape how they experience the present. From a psychological point of view, the same idea appears in a different form, where the individual has a cognitive and perceptual structure that allows them to see more, understand more, and question more, but does not automatically provide a way to integrate that understanding into stable alignment with the systems they are part of. In both cases, the focus shifts away from origin and toward resolution, because the pattern is not defined by where it began, but by what it continues to repeat. And what it repeats is not just ability or perception, but a gap between understanding and integration that remains active over time. This leads to a simple but important insight, which is that the feeling of not belonging may not come from being in the wrong place, but from carrying a pattern that has not yet found a way to fully align with the structures it encounters. When you look at it this way, the goal is no longer to explain the past or to identify a specific source, but to recognize the pattern in the present and understand how it shapes perception, decision-making, and the sense of alignment in everyday life. If you've followed this all the way through, then the question you're left with is probably not about Atlantis itself, but about whether this pattern feels familiar in your own experience. Because what we've described is not rare in the sense of being isolated. It's rare in the sense of being recognized clearly. You may have never used these exact words before, but you might recognize the feeling of understanding systems without fully aligning with them, or the sense that the world works in a way that you can navigate but not fully accept at a deeper level. And that difference matters more than it seems. So instead of asking whether you belong to this time, a more useful question might be this: are you out of place? Or are you carrying a pattern that was formed under different conditions and is still trying to resolve itself now? That shift in perspective doesn't require you to believe anything specific, but it does allow you to observe your own patterns more clearly, especially the ones that repeat, the ones that don't fully resolve, and the ones that continue to shape how you experience the world. If this made you see something in a different way, consider liking the video and subscribing to Edgar Cayce Narratives, because this channel is about exploring patterns like this in a clear and grounded way. And if something in your own experience feels similar, you can share it in the comments, or tell me what topic you want to explore next, and we'll continue building from there.